Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Get to Know a Theater with the Sound on Stage. I'm Greg Heilman. Today I'm joined by the Artistic Director of ACT Contemporary Theater, John Langs.
Hi.
Hi, John. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So the first question I have is around the name of the theater.
Yeah.
So moving out here from the East Coast, first time I saw it, I kept calling it just ACT. But then I hear other people call it ACT. Then I think you were doing an introduction for Stu last week that I was at. Wonderful show, by the way.
Thank you.
And you called it ACT Contemporary Theater. And then if you take that acronym, then it's like ACT. And what is, so settle the debate in my head. What is the official name and how do you refer to the theater?
It's a great question. We've just been through a rebranding, and quite frankly, but subtly, really did change the name. So the organization was originally called A Contemporary Theater. So it was an anagram, ACT, ACT, right? But then folks who loved the place called it The ACT, which in my mind was the A Contemporary Theater. And then some people called it the ACT Theater, which in my mind was the A Contemporary Theater, right? And so when we were really thinking about where we're going and the new mission, pulling out of the pandemic and that keen moment of really being able to do some introspection, we just liked the verb, ACT. Contemporary Theater. So that is the name of the organization.
Excellent. That works on a lot of levels.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the history of the theater organization, and a little bit about the building. I think the first thing I was struck with coming here was how just old and unique and beautiful this building is. And then you go into the theater in the kind of in the round. It's more in the not octagon or something like that?
10-sided.
Okay.
You figure it out.
Dodecahedron.
Say it again?
Well, it was a dodecahedron. It's like the 10 thing.
That's it. The dodecahedron.
Something like
cool.
that. High school. And then it looks like there was an old area there that you kind of modified for the stage. So let's talk about the little history of the building, then we'll talk about that.
I mean, the history of the building is extraordinary. It's going to turn 100 years old next season. And ACT will have been a theater for 60 years. I will have been here for 10 years. We're having what we're calling milestone mania. But when the first people who built this were actual theater producers, and they were part of the Fraternal Order of Good Works. They were called the Eagles, like the Elks. You know, it was a lodge, and it was basically a club that had apartments upstairs where you could stay. It was also that particular theater that you're talking about, where the dodecahedron is. It was many things. That stage at the end of it, so that floor used to go all the way across the stage. So it was on the Chitlin circuit, and so you had all kinds of performers, mostly black performers from around the country as they moved through, play there. There were wrestling matches in the middle and boxing matches in the middle. Famously, Martin Luther King was allowed only to speak at this theater when he came to town. There's a bust commemorating Martin Luther King in the theater. It was also a venue for many rock bands, many punk bands. So Janis Joplin, The Doors, Duran Duran, The Cure, all played on that stage.
Wow.
University of Washington used to have its dances on that stage. And then this building fell into disrepair, I think, in the late 70s or 80s. And it was really like a white elephant. And so when Greg Falls, who is the founder of ACT Theater, ACT Contemporary Theater, outgrew Lower Queen Anne, which is where On the Boards is now. They were looking all over the city to find a building, and then one day somebody brought them here. And there's a great story where they all had they had to wear masks before masks were popular to even come into this building, and there was bat guano dripping from the ceiling, and they walked into the space with flashlights and saw this most of this pristinely all of that decorative gold flecked paint that you see in that theater was still there, but it was just dirty and messy and broken. And so they raised $37 million to move the organization from Lower Queen Anne to here. And that was '97. We've been here ever since.
Okay. And you said they're celebrating 60 years. Is it next year?
60 years of Act Theater next year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
And you've had, I mean, through the years, world premieres, a number of world premieres, even, as...
47, in fact.
Yeah.
So we're going to do our 50th world premiere on that Milestone Mania year, our 25, 26. This next year, we haven't announced yet, 2 world premieres will hit the stage, so number 48 and 49.
Excellent.
And then we'll get to 50 when we turn 60.
Okay. Well, then let's talk about, speaking of programming, so you've been artistic director for 10 years. Where were you before that?
Freelancing, 25 years all over the country. I had a circuit that went from New York to Chicago, Wisconsin, strangely, but also Los Angeles and Seattle. And my first show in Seattle was 2003, and I was fortunate enough to direct King Lear at the Seattle Shakespeare Company. And I came to town and I said, "Who's the King Lear?" And they were like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Well, you asked me to direct King Lear. You must have this person in mind." "Well, we don't." I was like, "Who's the King Lear?" And they said, "Well, Kurt Beattie, who happened to be the artistic director here." And so we forged a relationship through that process. And then he would just show up in weird places around the country. I was directing in New York, and there was a knock on the door, and somebody said, "There's this gentleman who would love to watch rehearsal." I was like, "Great." I was like, "Kurt, okay, come on in." Same thing happened in Chicago. We were at Looking Glass Theater. Knock, knock, knock. There's a gentleman who would like to come in and watch rehearsal. Okay. And it was Kurt, and he would always invite me into this office when I was in town. And at one point, he just said, I think you should be my associate artistic director, and I don't think I'm going to be here very long, so learn the job.
Wow. So it's kind of kismet, or was he tracking you around the...
Yes, both. I think he was certainly not. I think he just happened to be in those towns and knew that I was in rehearsal. So I was honored, and he's a brilliant man of the theater, and I just really felt very blessed that he saw something in me.
Well, the one thing I have learned over these last few years of doing this is as big and as wide of an expanse that the theater community has really is a small community. It's interesting how that works. So. Well, we're glad you're here.
Thanks.
And as you sit and program the next season, and you program all of these, let's talk a little bit about your philosophy of programming. And I want to look at this in a couple ways, because you're intermixing some premieres, some brand new works. You're intermixing, at Christmas you always do the Christmas Carol. That's become a tradition in the area. And then you also direct some of the shows yourself. So. I guess let's talk a little bit first about just generally your philosophy when laying out a season, how you balance the need to fill seats versus, hey, what's an important work to do? And then we'll talk a little bit about, directing and some of the other stuff.
Yeah, it's a great question. We inherited this beloved tradition of A Christmas Carol, and that will turn 50 years old next year as well.
Another milestone.
Milestone, 50 years of it. And so that is interesting when you are, contemporary theater, that there is this traditional production that's so important to the city. And, when I say that, I mean like people who are, grandparents now saw it when their grandparents brought them, and now they're bringing their grandchildren. And so we honor that, and Greg Falls, who was our founding artistic director, adapted it. So it has a very special place in our season, which is interesting when you are a contemporary theater, and we feel our real mission is to be adding to the national conversation about what's happening in the world now through finding plays that create conversations about the things we're all going through or talking about, right? And like any curation of any theater company, I think of it as a meal with many different, there's the appetizers and the main course and the dessert, and you want to provide a balanced diet for your community, but also as artists, we're trying to stretch our own versatility and take on works that are uniquely theatrical, which to us means that you can't do this on film and television.
Right.
It has to need to be in a space in front of people. Like, it has to have that hunger just baked into it. we want to be form breaking, so we look at things that take the theater and and that experience of theater and twist it. A good example of that was Every Brilliant Thing, which is a cast of 15 but only one actor, so the rest of the cast is whoever shows up that night, right?
Yeah.
That was a real adventure for us. Wolf Play, which has a central character that's played by a puppet, and those kind of theatrical adventures are really, really exciting to us. And next year, I haven't announced the season yet, but we are pushing off the absurdity of this next election year, and we know we need a good laugh. We know we're going to need it, and so we're ripping out of the gate with 2 really fun comedies right off the top, so that we can all sort of get a good dose of entertainment in our lives as we're dealing with all of the messiness of our political system.
Yes, which is not going away anytime soon.
Yeah,
doesn't
right?
seem like so.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've noticed is so whether it's I usually bring my wife to a show or my son, and it's the shows that you have here always spark conversations on the way home. So it's about an hour drive back to Port Orchard around the Sound, and we were always talking about the show. And some of them, Cambodian rock band, for instance, I think my son talked about for like a week or 2 afterwards.
So great,
because just the messaging and the way it's presented. And I think we tried to honor that last year when ACT had a number of nominations in our awards that we had last year, and the shows are definitely always among the most thought-provoking, I think, out there.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we aim to do that. I was writing a message today to our community just about those prickly little think pieces. Case for the Existence of God for us was one of those where just the provocative nature of the title that really made people lean in, and then completely upended their expectations and made them talk all the way home about, like, well, what is the case for the existence of God, and why is that the name of the play, and what happened at the end of it? Like, that's an experience that leaves me really buzzing. And like you said, your son is that feeling is something I think is unique that theater can do. Can really stick to your ribs for a long time after.
Absolutely. So you're directing the Layman trilogy, which is coming up next. How do you, when you program, do you always pick a show for yourself? Do you think about that when you're laying out the show of, hey, what do I want to direct this year, or does it just happen organically?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I read plays with a curation committee that is made up of core company artists and community members. It's important to have a lot of different voices at the table, and talk a lot about like communities and representations and who tells which stories. But as the artistic director, there's 2 things really. One is the ability to ground acts aesthetic in an ongoing dialogue with both audiences and artists, I think is the job of an artistic director. Like, you're out there taking in as much information and listening to as many people as you can, but a consistency of what this theater company is capable of, being driven by an artist who gets to know the community at a deep level because you work with them. You're here all day. You get those long discussions with people about like, I had a beer with one of the wonderful people who work in our production department, and he told me, he's like, we just need to keep doing more adventurous visuals on our stage. Like, I miss that. I miss figuring out the hard problems and those awe-inspiring moments. And boy, like, I was like, I hear you, and I'm going to deliver a season that's going to keep you really busy. And that's this year, right? Like,
yeah.
Well, the kind of work that they did. So I think that's part of, I feel like, my responsibility as an artistic director. Also, quite practically, I am a, what do they call it? Exempt employee, which means that they don't have to pay me to direct. so I'm also saving the company, whatever the director's fee is every time I get out on stage. And when we want to put as many people on stage as possible, that's significant.
So you mentioned in the last statement about a core company, and this is something that I'm not entirely familiar with, especially at the professional theater level. I think of a theater as a venue that programs shows, but act as a core company. And can you explain how that works and how people get into the core company? And
yeah, absolutely. So it's evolved. It started in 2016. I come from a background of working with a lot of people, a lot of different companies, like Looking Glass Theater Company or American Players Theater, which has a core company. And what I love about those systems is that you develop a shorthand with a group of artists, and you can really kind of, I would say, push each other. Sharpen off of each other. Like if you and I do a lot of plays together, I'm like, I've seen that from you before. And all of a sudden there's a kind of permission to say, like, I've seen it, what else can we do? And I wanted that challenge, and I wanted to be able to provide that challenge to a group of artists and encourage, like, how we move from good to great, and what is that process? And I think shorthand, familiarity, and safety, trust, and sometimes permission to argue are really important factors. And I wanted to encourage that spirit here. It started where we thought we were going to give a group of actors a season and have a core company for each season. What happened very quickly was we all deeply, deeply fell for each other. And so it became cumulative. So the next season, we'd still look around for the people, like what is the work that we can do with this group of people, and we would add. And then it was started with actors, and then it became actors and writers, and now it is actors, writers, and designers who make up that core company. During the pandemic, they became like the ethical heart of the theater, really, really looking at the We See White American Theater document, really helping us challenge ourselves. So they've been leaders in that space. It's a paid position in that we kind of pay hourly. So there's a bank of money that we use each year, and there's like a set hourly payment. So anytime they're working for ACT, they get that payment. And quite frankly, they're the people that I think of first when I am thinking about who needs to design this show, who are the actors that we are looking at for this show. It's not exclusive. It's not meant to shut down the theater company, but to really help artists grow and also be great ambassadors of the work.
And it doesn't preclude them from working in other theaters, right?
No, not at all. Not at all. No, in fact, I think it's fantastic that we get that inhale, exhale with company members moving in and out. And it's loose, and how you get in is a curious thing. A lot of times other core company members will say, we have to look at this person. Look at the work they're doing in the community. Sometimes you just get a sense when people start to work here in repetition that they, and it's not for everybody, it really isn't. Like, and it takes a certain kind of person. And we've only had one person be like, I'm done and dusted. Like, I'm core no more. I think that's a direct quote. And Godspeed. That was just what they needed at that time. But for the other 26 people have stuck. So yeah.
Well, speaking of community and things so ACT isn't just a theater. I mean, you have community programs and work with the city and can you explain some of the other things you do other than just present shows on stage? Yeah,
there's a pretty robust education and engagement program that's only 2 years in. We've kind of remade it after the pandemic. So we support Ticks for Teachers, which is a free night for teachers to come and see shows. Teen Ticks for teens. Community Days, which have been really huge for us, where we take a look at the people that we are representing on stage and invite communities to come and celebrate their culture, their point of view in our space, and try to connect our audiences in a deeper way to the communities that are being represented on stage. We also have a young core company at this point, and they commission a play from a local playwright, and we produce it with them. And that company is really so much about a pipeline of like who's the next generation of artists. So all that work is going on in that space. It's new, it's early with that work, and we intend to expand it.
It brings up another question that discussed or thought about for a little while is how do you keep theater fresh for younger audiences? I think a lot of it, especially when I look at the community theater space, the audiences tend to skew kind of older, and then you worry about that there's not enough of a foundation of younger people coming back in. Is it through programming? Is it through the outreach that you feel we can engage those younger people? Programs in high schools, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And I think Shauna Bestock, who is a tremendous associate artist with engagement education, and I think I've learned a lot from her. And one of the things is a belonging. What does it take for a young person to feel like they belong at your theater? And one of the things I think she's done so well is like put them on the main stage, let them act in those spaces. In fact, a lot of the programming that they work on is based on main stage productions. So she'll look at our season and say, we're going to do an evening of scenes from each one of these plays. And then we're going to have one of our local writers who write for the main stage write for you. And then we're going to put you out on that stage, on the set of a show that the rest of the community has seen, and you're going to act out there. And you damn well better believe that the next time they're in the space, they're like, that's my space, right? That feeling.
Yeah.
That feeling is I think, how I got into it too, And I think we're trying to make that happen because a lot of young people, I don't even think, knew that this was a job that was available to them. We have a terrific program called Engage the Stage, right? So new also, but working beautifully. Instead of a matinee, the students are brought in and we sit them down just like they're about to see the show. Then the cast and the director walk out on stage and say, hi, this is who we are. This is what we're about to do. 2 scenes from the show. And we'd like your questions. And so instead of like sitting through just the matinee experience, they get this like deep dive into the DNA of the play, and then they get that magic dispelled, and the people who actually made it stand there and answer their questions. And I feel like that particular engagement, we just watch the eyes pop open
because they're participating in it. Yeah. It's not just it's a bilateral experience.
And then they get to say, "You're like me. I'm like you."
Yeah.
There's not that big of a distance. I could be that, And that's not just actors. That's like sound design as a job, or set design, or prop construction. Like these are real artist jobs that we need to keep cultivating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with all the wonderful programming, first of all, when are you going to announce the next season?
April 19th.
Okay.
It's coming.
So we're less than a month away.
Yeah, I will say, spoiler alert, we're adding a show to the season, and we're getting, we had to trim down our to like 2.5 week runs, just pandemic and audience and coming back, and a couple of our shows are, I think we're about to, by the time this comes out, we will have announced an extension on Lehman. So we're having a really good season ticket-wise, and we'll grow a little next year, which to me feels really good.
Yeah, well, especially coming out of COVID, it's people were hesitant to go out, and you're competing not just, and I say this every interview, I think, we're competing not just against other theaters or other live events, you're competing against the couch, Netflix, and Disney Plus, and all of the things at home.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is so impressive and amazing about your curation and some of the other theaters in town here, is that you're putting up events, you're putting up shows that are events that are people are going to want to, or people should come out, and people are going to want to come out and maybe see once, maybe even see multiple times, so
we're trying to break inertia, like an object at rest will stay at rest.
Oh yeah.
so that equal force has to be greater. And it's so, I mean, you know this, and I'm really grateful that you do what you do, because you have to hear about these things. And all of our budgets are so limited. Like, we can't compete with the marketing that we need to fill these houses. So the people who come into our theater are our best marketing. And so if it's good, I mean, you know, we had a show that did 180% of its single ticket goal this year, which was phenomenal. And all I can attribute it to is the excellence that was on that stage and people going out and talking about it. You know, I think that's where a lot of theaters are right now. And so it just is, this why y'all are so important.
Yes, word of mouth is so important with these things. And if people do want to, other than coming to shows, that seems like the most obvious way to support the theater. How else can people support ACT?
Yeah, well, I would say that last year we launched the New Works Northwest Festival, NW2, and it was a huge success. And it was really ACT Contemporary Theater putting its chips down on local writers. Like, we want to be the home for the voice of the Pacific Northwest. We truly believe that the folks in our town weren't born to be interpreters, but makers of culture. So we do a lot of interpreting, and I really try to stay away from being like the vending machine of New York theater, like put in a quarter and get out your production of whatever. And in order to do that, we need an audience to really lean in to that vision with us. We got a lot to say in the Pacific Northwest, and we have a lot of talented writers, but they need to find their audience. So like our New Works page on the website, and really staying abreast of what's happening in that space would be incredibly helpful to us.
Okay, and information about everything that we've talked about here, the shows coming up, looking out for your next season, acttheatre.org.
That's it.
So people can head out there.
Yeah.
John Langs, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been great meeting you and talking to you. And thank you for listening. I'm so glad we started back up with the Get to Know a Theater segment on the Sound on Stage, because there's so much good theater, so much good live performing arts in the Puget Sound region. We just want to make sure you guys know about it and help get the word out. So once again, John Langs, Artistic Director of ACT Contemporary Theater, has been my guest. I am Greg Heilman. Thank you for joining me. Until next time, I will see you at the stage door.